Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the Norwegian News with your host, Father Deacon Ananias. I apologize that I've been in the artificial tanner. I'm all orange. No, it's the lighting. I don't know. As you see, I've got my other computer here. Laptop here that I can actually do some slides for you because my Streamlabs is not working. And because I put this computer here, it's done an auto adjust on the light to make everything orange. So please forgive me. And today we are going to do an introduction to philosophy of mind with your host, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias Sorm. And also, today is the feast day of the Apostle St. James. So for all of you who share the name James, a blessed names day. St. James, the Apostle, the brother of our Lord, please intercede for us and pray for us. And I'd like to begin this lecture with a short prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever, into ages of ages. Amen. Illumine the minds and hearts of your servants, O Lord, giving us wisdom and discernment through the prayers of our Holy Father, Lord Jesus Christ, our God. Have mercy upon us and save us. Amen. So I'm assuming this time there was a problem with YouTube. Last night was not a problem with my microphone or my setup. Something was going on with YouTube. So I think everything sounds good. So, brothers, let us begin. Get your coffee. Get your minds in orders. And we shall begin. So I want to get some of this glare out. And maybe get this a little bit closer so that you guys can see it. Let me know. It's better. So, welcome to the introduction to philosophy of mind. So it's going to be a general introduction. And in this introduction, we're going to discuss several topics that are subsumed under what we call philosophy of mind. And these include, but not limited to, the mind-body problem, consciousness, the problem of other minds, the philosophy of perception, free will versus determinism, intentionality within philosophy of mind, which we'll discuss. We'll also talk about mental causation, and those will be some we go over. And in this, you'll see here up on the slide that within the philosophy of mind, there's two problems that are identified. I think this was outlined by our friend here, David Chalmers. So I've got a quote to David Chalmers, The Conscious Mind. And as he outlines, and as thinkers within the philosophy of mind also acknowledge, there's an easy problem within the philosophy of mind. And that's simply, well, how could a physical system, and by physical system, they're obviously referring to the brain, how could a physical system like the brain be the sort of thing that could learn or could remember? That is identified as the easy problem. The hard problem is the problem of the existence of consciousness. And we'll get into exactly what consciousness means. But you get a clue here. The question really with the hard problem is, how could a physical system be the sort of thing that could have consciousness? Qualitative experiences, for example, the qualitative experience of what it's like for me to be in pain. That is the hard problem. That's the most difficult problem within philosophy of mind to identify and be able to address and reason through and explain. Now, I think at this point, what I'd like to do is go through several of the various schools of thought, contemporary schools of thought within philosophy of mind. So if we turn to the next slide. The first one we have is reductive physicalism, sometimes referred to as eliminative physicalism. That is people like Daniel Dennett, Paul and Patricia Churchland, the Churchlands. And with somebody like Daniel Dennett, eliminative physicalism or reductive physicalism is really attempting to say that these higher level phenomenal experiences that by which we call and identify as consciousness are really illusory. They should be limited. So the project, and there's several projects within philosophy of reductionism and reducing something to its lower base. And in this case, the idea with Daniel Dennett in reductive physicalism is that just eliminate the idea of higher level phenomena. There's simply nothing more than neuronal brain states, C fibers firing and going on. Now, the argument's obviously more complicated than I'm explaining right now, but I'm just giving an outline of what is the meaning of eliminative physicalism or reductive physicalism. The other one that we hear is emergentism. Now, let's be clear, this is not this is not a theory of materialism. It's non-reductive in nature. And let's see if I have, no, I'm not going to keep turning back and grab my books. I'm going to go from memory here. Some of the famous emergentists, probably the most famous is Timothy O'Connor, and also John Searle. Now, John Searle, he identifies himself not as a materialist, not as a physicalist, but a biological naturalist. Now, you might be saying, isn't that splitting hairs? Perhaps, but the thing is, there's certain things that materialism and physicalism, functionalism, that these theories commit you to. So somebody like John Searle, who develops a sophisticated argument for emergent phenomenon within mind, is an outspoken critic of both functionalism, materialism, and the whole project of reductionism. And so he's going to go into the camp with the rest of the emergentists. But really, John Searle's theory of mind is what he calls biological naturalism. So he doesn't want to posit anything above nature and is committed to the naturalist project, or is, I'm trying to remember the author, natural ontological attitude, considered consciousness and higher level mental states and properties are emergent phenomenon. I'll go into that later, but just going to go over Timothy O'Connor. I don't think we'd classify him is a naturalist. And so, again, he's an emergentist when it comes to his theory of mind, but not a naturalist. And we're going to talk about what functionalism is, too, because this is really a popular contemporary theory within the philosophy of mind. Now, of course, we have substance dualism, most notably held by the philosophers J.P. Moreland and Richard Swinburne. And that's the idea that substance, things or real things, the world's composed of two fundamentally things within the universe, and that is material things and non-material things. And so this harkens back to, obviously, Rene Descartes, who is really the father of substance dualism, in which he says, look, there is res extensa, the extended things, that is, i.e. matter, and then there is non-extended things, the thinking things, the res cogitans, and that what you are, which is, according to Descartes, is a soul and a mind that's attached to a body. Now, of course, when it comes to J.P. Moreland and Richard Swinburne, they're not Cartesian substance dualists, but when it comes to their theory of mind, yes, the mind is entirely material and interacts with a physical body. So we have two substances here that interact, and there's certain issues that are going to come up with that, of which we will address in today's lecture. We might know mind, hand, the cross, right? The idea is a panpsychism, that mind and consciousness is shot through the entire world, and that psyche, mind or consciousness, displays its consciousness and mind, its properties of mind, at various levels. In human beings, it's the most notable, but it goes all the way down into animals, plants, and even rocks. But as you go down the kind of chain of being to the lower entities within nature, these things are not as robust when it comes to displaying consciousness and having consciousness. A lot of this comes from, with forgetting the Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose talks about this, a physicist, and the collapse of the wave function. He ties that into microtubules, and that everything has consciousness. That, but within human beings, because they have much more microtubules going on within the brain and breaking into the wave, collapsing the wave function produces consciousness, basically. So we should have, according to Roger Penrose, obviously we should have more consciousness. It should be more notable. But as you go down the spectrum, less of the properties of mind and consciousness. One proponent who subscribes to panpsychism is your man, David Chalmers. So panpsychism, just to sum up, mind is shot through the whole world and universe. It just displays at higher levels in various and different entities, higher into more of it. That's basically. Then you have somebody named Colin McGinn. Colin McGinn has an interesting theory that he subscribes to when it comes to mind, and that is called Mysterianism. And like the word suggests, when it comes to mind and developing a science of the mind, ultimately it's a mystery. That there's things that we're unable to explain, and or we cannot develop an objective third-person point of view, which science wants to develop, things within this kind of objective third-person point of view, that we can't do that. There can be no science of mind. And his argument's something to the effect that, well, it's due to our own limitations, such that when we try to introspect and do objective science the way that we would do objective science on objects in the world, we're unable to do this with ourselves due to our own limitations. And he argues, Colin McGinn does, this should be no surprise because microwaves, to our physical constitution and our eyesight, we're only able to pick up so much on the spectrum. When it comes to infrared, microwaves, these things we're not capable of perceiving that. So the argument goes that likewise, could it be perhaps that we have certain limitations that prevent us from being able to develop an objective science of the mind? If so, you are subscribing to what Colin McGinn subscribes to. That is called Mysterianism. Functionalism. Functionalism, best known by the philosopher Gilbert Ryle. And functionalism is the idea that it really doesn't matter, no pun intended, what the matter is. In other words, the idea of mind is, it's neither what the substance dualists say, that there's a separate substance called mind and it's immaterial, but it doesn't have to be on the other dialectical extreme of materialism. It can be likened to a game or a program. The analogy typically is, think about chess. So I'm going to raise this question about chess in the context of asking the question, is mind simply brain? Can we reduce it simply to, can we have an identity between the two? Well, the functionalist is going to say, look, it's not important. The matter is not important. It's the role in which, or the program, and that's the important thing. So think about it this way. Is it important, or is it essential or necessary that in order to have the game, the chess game, that we actually have to have the pawns, the queen, the rook carved out in marble, the bishop? No. Well, what is a pawn? Is it marble? Can I make an isomorphic identity and say the pawn is simply this material entity? Well, as you see in chess, it's not too important, and neither is it essential or necessary that the pawn be defined in terms of identity with that particular material structure. For example, we could use rocks. We could use chairs. And what defines the pawn is the function. What the function is that pawn is the sort of thing that on the first move can move 2 spaces. After that, 1 space forward, and it kills 1 space diagonal. That is what a upon is. And so we define its identity not in terms of its material constituents, but by the function and role that it plays. And as it turns out, the role that the pawn plays and the identity that it has is interconnected to all the pieces, all the roles that they play, how they're defined. In other words, in terms of the whole game. And a functionalist is going to argue that isn't it much better that we think of mind like that? Is mind simply brain? No. But you're going to need some type of material physical substrate by which to play out the role and function. But it doesn't matter what the material is. And this is going to develop later. The material could be silicone chips. Anything that would be robust enough to run the program or role by which we call mind, that would be sufficient in order to have mind. And it's really interesting. If you're interested in this, Gilbert Ryle has an article called The Myth of Descartes. And it's a really interesting article. So it's a critique of substance dualism and Descartes' concept of the mind. The mind could not be associated with the brain or the body. Ryle's basically in critiquing, and it's going to set up, that is, Descartes' going to set up what we call the mind-body problem. Descartes would say, I have a mind and I have a body. Interesting enough, Gilbert Ryle says, we've got a category error here. Second period. But he says, what doesn't make sense is to have, in one sentence or statement, I have a mind and a body. Because emphasizing have, the way that you have a mind is very different than the way that you have a body. And he uses I have a body by showing the example that he uses is she came home in a flood of tears, she's crying, and a sedan chair. Now, if you don't know what a sedan chair is, just think about the queen being carried on that chair by the servants. That's a sedan chair. Now, that sentence might sound very strange to you, and so it should. She came home in a flood of tears in a sedan chair. It sounds strange because the way that you come home in a flood of tears is very different than the way that you come home in a sedan chair. And so what you have is a category error in which the sentence that you're forming is attempting to say univocally the way you would come home in. And then uses two different senses of coming home in. And therefore is a category error. Now, if we reconstructed that sentence into two sentences, she came home in a flood of tears, period. She came home in a sedan chair. We're not going to have a category error. So he uses this analogy, Gilbert Ryle does, to illustrate it doesn't make sense to say I have a mind and I have a body, because the way in which you have is different in both senses, and you're mixing categories. Now, I've talked to my students about this. Do you remember when we were younger and our grade school teachers would tell us there is no such thing as a stupid question? Wrong. I hear them every day. I hear stupid questions. Let me give you some examples of stupid questions. And by stupid, nonsensical. There's nothing to answer with this. How long has your brother been a married bachelor? that is a coherent question in thought. But bachelor means an unmarried man. So we're saying, how long has your brother been a married, unmarried man? And by married, we're not equivocating when we say un and married. We mean it in both the same sense. And so what we have formed in that question is a logical contradiction. And as I've often said, look, some stuff is so bad and so wrong in the ways that it can be false. Other things like this don't even get to the dignity of being false. They don't even rise to that level. It's just nonsense. There is nothing to say true or false about. It's a mixing of categories. Let me give you another illustration. How fast does blue smell running on Wednesday? No stupid question? Really? There's no such thing as stupid questions? Of course there is. I've just given you two right off the top of my head. There is, just because you can take words and put them together and form sentences and statements that are perhaps grammatically correct, doesn't mean that they're sensical, that there's anything to answer within that question. So obviously, when I said blue runs faster than whatever question you want to make, either I'm having a stroke, which could be, look, he's having a stroke, or I'm making category errors. So it's important to be able to identify our categories, what way things are modified. Are we saying something, but it's equivocal? She came home in, you're anticipating a univocal sense of that, and they give two different meanings. She came home in a sedan chair and she came home in a flood of tears. It's nonsensical. It's a category error, just as Gilbert Ryle would argue to say that I have a mind and body. It's nonsensical. There's nothing to work with there. So sometimes, yes, we can get some stupid questions, nothing to answer. We need to be able to identify. So Gilbert Ryle goes on to, after identifying that, look, substance dualism is really committed to this sort of category error when we say I have a mind and I have a body. He goes in to start to develop his idea of functionalism. And if somebody was doing brain surgery, and this would both apply to the substance dualists and the materialists. Somebody's doing brain surgery, and a student's brought in. And the student wants to know, surgeon, doctor, can you tell me where the mind is? Can you show me? Sure. And he does. He opens up the patient's brain, and starts doing brain surgery. And says, look, there's the frontal lobe. Here's the cortex. And it starts going through all the parts of the brain. And the student says, yeah, but where's the mind? And after the whole viewing, the doctor says to the student, well, I've shown you the mind. Do I have to show you again? Yeah, but I don't. Here's the frontal lobe. Here's the cerebral cortex. So the student stops and says, so the frontal lobe's the mind? No. So the cerebral cortex is the mind. And it goes through every piece. None of that is the mind. So where is the mind? I've just shown you. Okay, you might be puzzled at this point. And so Gilbert Ryle takes us through on another analogy. He says, this is like asking the question, where is the university? So suppose I'm going to give you a tour of my university where I teach. And I take you, let's say, to the admissions office. First things first. And you say, so this is the university? I'm like, no, this is the admissions office. Okay, well, show me the university, you say. Okay. Now I'm taking you to the library. Oh, not the university. This is the library. Okay, we're going to see the university. I'm showing you the university. Come on. Here is my 1400 building where my office is. Here's my classes where I teach philosophy. So this is the university. Finally, no, this is simply the social sciences division. Frustrated. And so I end up showing you sports grounds, the parking lots, all the various buildings. And I said, this completes our tour of my university where I teach. And you're getting even more frustrated. Well, wait a minute. Each time I asked you if this was the university, you told me no. And now after the whole end of the tour, you said we just saw the university. Yes, I say. Now you're even more aggravated and confused. How could you have shown me the university, you ask, if you just told me none of those things were the university? And here is where Gilbert Ryle's argument comes in. The university is not any individual building. In fact, doesn't even have to have any buildings. It's the role and function that each building or office plays. The administration plays a specific social sciences division plays a specific role. The philosophy department plays a specific role. It's not important in that particular building. We could move them around. We could have no buildings. We could have flag markers where you have all the workers I'm here at the library. And you do library stuff. You do the role of library. But what the university is not any particular one thing. It's all the things and the roles that they play in conjunction with one another that make the idea by which we call the university. So Gilbert Ryle argues that isn't this exactly what we mean when we say, where is my mind? As we're looking, again, he's committed to a sort of naturalism. So he doesn't want to say that mind is some type of immaterial, spooky stuff, but it's natural. But he doesn't want to be a materialist and identity theorist and simply stick to brain matter. It's not. It doesn't even have to be gray matter. And the mind is not located, or should I say, identified with any part of the gray matter, but rather what our particular gray matter in each part of that, what role and function that it's playing as a whole in conjunction with one another. All the parts play a role very much like the chess game and the chess pieces. And this is what we call mind. That is a very brief summation of a functionalism. It goes much more in depth. And functionalism is going to emerge out of behaviorism, logical behaviorism, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, which then sets up for AI. But let's talk a little bit about identity theorists. Identity theorists, the proponents of that, the most famous proponents would be David Armstrong and his anomalous monism, and Donald Davidson. What identity theorists are attempting to answer is the objection of Leibniz. Leibniz's conceivability of one second, I don't know why I'm blanking on forgot the name of that. Leibniz conceivability. Not conceivability, that's what got me. The indiscernibility of identicals. So the way that the Leibniz A is identical to B if and only if there is nothing that A has that B does not have. That's the idea. So guess what? If you can find something that A has that B does not have, you've made a discernment, and they're not identical. So that's harkening back to Leibniz's indiscernibility of identicals. So here's what somebody's going to say. If somebody attempts to make a strict ontological identity between mind and brain, they're going to make an indiscernibility of identicals argument like Leibniz. For example, they can't be identical because when I ask you to think of triangle, I cannot find triangle anywhere in your brain when I'm doing brain surgery. It's not like we have the patient, we're doing brain surgery, and let's suppose he's awake. Now think of triangle. My God, look at, there's a triangle forming right in. Nobody's going to see that. Now you might see certain regions activated, but that would be silly, says one, to assume that mind, mental states like thought, the triangle, the three-sided geometrical figure is identical to the brain. He's saying like, I'm going 65 miles per hour in my car. And when I'm going 65 miles per hour, the necessary condition for that is my engine's running. Wouldn't it be strange if somebody say, no, that's just the necessary condition that makes it possible. You can't make identity between. Now it's just an analogy. Maybe that's not the best analogy, but you get the point. So the very fact that you can have descriptions of brain states that are different than mental states and vice versa is a supposed refutation of a strict identity theory, that there's an ontological identity between mental states, the mind, and but here's where it gets a bit tricky. How many people have heard of Hesperus and Phosphorus? The morning star and the evening star. Obviously, if you ask, well, what's the morning star? Well, the morning star, and you give a certain description, it has a certain luminosity and intensity that by which we can measure, and it's at this certain angle in the sky at this certain time. What is the evening star? Well, the evening star is different. The evening star has a different luminosity and degree of luminosity and is located at a different time in a different place in the sky. And just like you would say that, for example, Mercury is different from Jupiter, how do you know that? Because you begin to give descriptions, and according to Leibniz principle, principle of the indiscernibility of identicals principle, you'd say that's how I know, because Mercury has things that Jupiter does not. But this is tricky because it turns out that Hesperus is Phosphorus. The morning star is the evening star. It's Venus. It's just at different times. It has different descriptions. And this objection allowed for the possibility to entertain that, in fact, the arguments typically mounted against identity theorists wouldn't work, because we have things that are in fact identical but have different descriptions. And that likewise, Mind and brain could be ontologically identical. We could make a strict identity between the two while having different descriptions. Mental states are described in very different ways than brain states. So, in kind of a really fast overview, that's identity theorists for you. That's Donald Davidson's and David Armstrong's sort of arguments. Non-reductive physicalism or non-reductive materialism is held by people like Nancy Murphy and David Chalmers. So David Chalmers is also a panpsychist, but he develops non-reductive. Mind cannot be reduced to physics. Mind cannot be reduced to brain states. Mind cannot be reduced simply to matter. And this is probably the functionalists and identity theorists that confront the strongest arguments against their theory from the non-reductive arguments. So we'll get into like the irreducibility of consciousness arguments and various arguments within that genre that are attempts to refute materialism and reductive physicalism. But there we go. So that is pretty much a purview of all the contemporary philosophies of mind that we have on the table today. There'll be different varieties of that. Now let's just go over some glossary of terms that you will encounter within philosophy of mind. And I'll give a brief description of each of those. Let's see here. Just checking my live chat, making sure you guys are still alive, that I'm not boring you to death. Looks like you guys are alive and well. God bless. Glory to God. So, common terminology in philosophy of mind that you'll come across. Properties. Things are said to have properties. I have the property of orangeness on my faceness. Events. This is really big. You get less talk of substance and more in terms of events, which is interesting. Processes. Qualia. Qualia is an interesting one. Qualia is what's attributed to consciousness, and that is obviously named after qualitative states. What does that mean? Well, obviously, within our categories, we have quantity, i.e. number, and quality. Quantity in terms of number. So this is 4 times as much, 5 times as much. It's double the half. Things like that would be in terms of quantity. Quality can admit of more or less in terms of degrees, but not necessarily in number, perhaps in intensity. For example, you are having an experience of my orange faceness right now. And the orangeness is best described within the category of quality. And so this leads into the idea of consciousness. What consciousness is defined as is not self-consciousness, not being aware of yourself, but consciousness simply is just awareness. Awareness of experiences. The what it's like of experiences. And so we get a term in philosophy of mind to identify the what it's like of an experience, of which you experience in conscious states. So there's something it's like for you to experience either orange or coffee And you can begin to describe that. It's got earthy tones with some mild tannins and a slight bitter, rounded off by a nice fruity finish. What am I describing there? I'm describing the way it's like for me to experience that. Now you drink the same coffee and you're like, my God, it tastes like garbage in the cellar kept for 3 years with asbestos falling in on it. And you give this whole completely different description. Because the what it's like experience that you're having is qualitatively different, not quantitatively, qualitatively different than my experience. And this really is the proper object of consciousness, as qualitative experiences, by which we call, I know a really creative word, qualia. Also, we have propositional states. You'll come across this a lot in philosophy of mind. Propositional states could either be beliefs or desires. Intentionality. So now we're returning back to intentionality. Now, let's just see. I want to see something real quick. Might have some notes on. So intentionality is a technical term. And intentionality is used by philosophers of mind to basically talk about its aboutness. Either our sentences or our mental states have this unique property of not just existing and being there, but they're directed at something. So if I'm thinking I have a mental state, Paris is beautiful in spring, or if I put that within a proposition, Paris is beautiful in springtime. Notice that what that mental state or proposition is about is not about my brain state. It's not just the there-ness. It's directed at some reality beyond my brain state. That is the technical term for intentionality. And so I'll just read you real quick. Intentionality is a technical term used by philosophers to refer to the capacity of mind by which mental states refer to or are about. That's what I said. Or of objects or state of affairs. So I use the state of affairs, Paris being beautiful in the springtime. In the world other than themselves. So that's why I qualified. It's not about your particular brain or mental state. It's about something else, and it's directed beyond your brain or mental state. Example, if I have a belief, it must be a belief that something is the case. If I have a desire, so desires also, that's why if you've seen propositional states have intentionality. They're about something. There doesn't just have to be a belief. It could be a desire to do something, or that something should happen. If I have a perception, I must at least take myself to be perceiving some object or state of affairs in the world. All of these are said to be intentional. Got it? In the sense that each of these states refer beyond itself. And intending in the ordinary sense, and so this is why it's important to qualify that this is a technical philosophy term that's not to be confused with the colloquial sense and common usage, the vulgar, in the original sense of the word vulgar, common. It's not in the original sense in which I intend to go to the movies. So intentionality isn't like I have an intention to go to the movies tonight. It's just one kind of intentionality among the others alongside belief, hope, fear, desire, and perception. In fact, the English technical term comes from the English intention. It doesn't come from that. It comes from actually German. In the German intentional, I'm going to butcher this, intentionalitat. Somebody help me with my German pronunciations. Which is strange because that looks intentionalitat. That sounds more Latin. In fact, it does ultimately derive from Latin. It's a special term not to be confused with intending in the ordinary sense. If the example here is, if I think the sun is 93 miles from the earth, how is it again that my thoughts can reach out and refer beyond themselves? So intentionality is something really interesting in philosophy of mind because it poses specific problems, particularly for materialists, that if mind is simply brain matter, then how can our beliefs and our desires, our hopes and dreams be directed? How can I have an aboutness? Because it's interesting. You look at everything in nature, you look at a tree or a table, it's not about anything. Now, you might ascribe certain meanings to that, but there's nothing intrinsic to the table that's about something. It's not referring to a state of affairs or entities beyond itself. And so this poses a huge problem for physicalists and materialists, that if everything's material and physical, then how is it that mind, or if they want to say brain, can have intentionality and be about stuff beyond just the brain matter? So that is intentionality. Another one, supervenience. Supervenience is a bit more complicated, and I'll go further into this, but it's basically to avoid causal relations between brain states, low-level states, we call them, or low-level property brain states, and mental states. That, for example, a physicalist or materialist might want to say that your brain causes your mental states. Well, there's certain problems that arise in philosophy of mind when it comes to that. And therefore, what was developed, particularly by, in the most robust sense, one philosopher that goes over this in the furthest details, what I'm trying to say, Jaegwon Kim. And basically, the idea is that a phenomenon A, so let's say a high level, we call high level states. So you'll see here that A properties versus are low level properties and B properties are high level properties. So let's say that phenomenon A is supervenient upon B. That's to say that A is totally dependent. So supervenience is a dependence, but it's not a causal, and it doesn't really even necessarily a logical dependence either. But the idea is that A is said to be supervenient on B if and only if A is totally dependent on B in such a way that any change to A properties has to be correlated to a change in B properties. So it's commonly said that consciousness is supervenient on brain processes. And the basic idea is there can be no changes in mental states without corresponding brain states. And again, I will go further into supervenience as we get further into our lecture. But I just want to see something real quick. So how are we doing A-level states? Are we all good? Let's want to make sure I have something correct before I go on. A-level and B. Let me just see. So I'm trying to see if I got that. I think I might have got the A and B. I think it's B property low level and A property, so just ignore on that. Don't know how that got mixed up. So I was just double checking on my slides here. What I can see. Okay, how are we doing, guys? Da, 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 da. Are these notes? No, they're my power slides. My notes are in my head. I do have some books that I can reference if. In fact, why don't I just look up something real quick? So here is a book. I recommend this. This is a nice introductory book to Philosophy of Mind. It's not super complex. And it gives a nice general summary of a lot of these positions. But I'm just thinking about something that I want to discuss, and I just want to make sure. I'm not sure if I have it in my slides or. Okay. Epiphenomenal. So phenomenalism, and that's the idea that, and really supervenience is an attempt to basically correct the theory of epiphenomenalism. Just see something real quick here. So what epiphenomenalism basically states is that lower level mental states cause the lower level brain states cause the higher level mental states. But higher level mental states have no causal efficacy when it comes to causally acting on body or brain states. I'm just going to see some, bear with me. 2021. So again, a lot of these things just arise out of the mind-body problem that comes from Descartes. So the idea is that the reason why epiphenomenalism even develops is because the causal closure principle, which harkens back to a sort of Occam's razor. Now, the bastardized version of Occam's razor is the simplest explanation as the right one, and that's not really the best way to think about that, because you could imagine a scenario where you're a detective working on some, I don't know, grand conspiracy case, a Ponzi scheme or something. I don't know, like, just think of any kind of just very complicated case that you're investigating, and where there's multiple people involved, conspiring to commit some intended goal as a crime. And then one of your Barney Fifes comes in and says, well, isn't it just the simplest explanation that the dog ate the homework and that, my God, Barney Fife, you're right. That is the simplest explanation. And Occam's razor says the simplest explanation is the right explanation. Clearly, we've got a defeater here. That's not and a good counterexample to that kind of vulgar notion of Occam's razor. That's not what Occam's razor means. Occam's razor, simply stated, is that need not multiply causes beyond what's necessary or sufficient to explain an effect, a given phenomenon. For example, if it's sufficient that the cue ball hitting with a certain force causes the 8-ball to go into the corner pocket, then that is enough. A violations of Occam's razor would be like, yeah, well, isn't my theory better? It's just got more causes. I mean, not only is it the cue ball that causes, but it's when that man's radio's turned on, and then when the other person puts his drink down, all these things kind of come together and then cause the 8-ball to go into the corner pocket. Now, according to the principle of parsimony or Occam's razor, you say, well, why are we going to prefer 3 causes to 1 cause when 1 cause is sufficient to explain the phenomena that we're seeing? So you prefer to go with the simplest explanation in terms of the causes need not multiply causes beyond what's necessary to explain the given phenomena. Not the simplest explanation is the best one or right one. So that needs to be cleared up. So this kind of leads into a conversation about, well, let's suppose that leads into a conversation about causal overdetermination. Suppose we got a DOA comes in dead on arrival, and you're the coroner and you have to fill out the death certificate. And so you get the reports, and the reports say that this person was shot in the head at the exact same time a lightning bolt struck this man. What are you going to put down as the cause of death? Death by lightning bolt and gunshot to the head. Now, maybe you'll do that, and maybe that'll pass, but for philosopher, we're going to go, wait a minute. Isn't any one of those, either the gunshot to the head or the lightning bolt, enough to kill the person? But now you have 2 causes that are sufficient to account for this person's death. You have a situation in which it's causally over-determined. That's what we're talking about here. The idea is that if I have a belief or if I have a desire, thought, man, I'm thirsty, reach down and grab that coffee cup, and take a nice drink of the coffee, and watch what happens. The common assumption is that it is my mental thought or my mental state that is causing my body to act in a certain way, that I'm able to reach down, grab the coffee cup, and bring it to my mouth and have a sip of my nice coffee. But then somebody objects, well, wait a minute. Can't we account for that at the lower base in terms of the body? That it all can be explained in terms of neuronal firings, the release of lactic acid, contracting muscles, Where does mind come in? Seems that we have a causal overdetermination problem, which you see is the next, I believe the next right here, causal overdetermination. So I'm kind of explaining the two together. Why do we need mind when everything can be accounted for at the biological material level? There's not enough room for two causes. So if the lower base, the physical, is sufficient to explain, then there's no need for mental causation, which you'll see here, downward causation. And so that doesn't mean that we don't have mental phenomenon. We do. So where does the mental phenomenon come from? The mental phenomenon is caused by the lower base, the neuronal base, by the body, the brain. And that produces the mental state, I'm thirsty. So the thirst itself can be explained by brain states. So where does the mental higher level phenomenal state come from of being thirsty? It comes from the brain state. But it's epiphenomenal in terms of causation. Why? Because what epiphenomenalism really means is that oh man, I'm trying to find this again. Things that are epiphenomenal float on top. Sort of like if this was a cappuccino or the foam on a wave or something like that. It comes from the wave. The wave's a better example. It comes from the wave. It's caused by the wave. But the foam on top of the wave doesn't do anything causally. It's causally inert and therefore is said to be epiphenomenal. And so the idea with epiphenomenalism is that mind, mental states, higher level mental states, phenomenon, is simply epiphenomenal on brain states. It has no causal efficacy. So let's go back to our example of my desire and my thought to reach down and grab the coffee cup and bring it up to my mouth to take a drink. What's going on there? What's going on is, according to, we can't violate Occam's razor. Just give me 1 second. I'm just trying to find something for the next slide. And have brain states and what's going on in the body be a sufficient causal explanation for my physical actions, while at the same time my mental state and desire to reach down and grab the coffee cup, where they're both causally efficacious. We would have a violation of Occam's razor, or what we would say is causally overdetermined. So we call brain states epiphenomenal. That's basically what epiphenomenalism means. Okay, I'm just looking. This is what I was looking for. Causal overdetermination. Perhaps we might claim that a physical state and a phenomenal state, though wholly distinct, might both qualify as causing a later physical state, namely this. If the physical state P sub 1 is associated with a phenomenal state Q sub 1, then perhaps it is both true that P sub 1 causes a later state P sub 2, and that Q sub 1 causes P sub 2. This is counterintuitive. P sub 1 is already sufficient cause of P sub 2. So Q sub 1 would seem to be causally redundant. But it's not obvious that Q sub 1 could not stand in a causal relation to P sub 1, nevertheless. It may be especially reasonable if we adopt a non-reductive view of causation, the sort advocated by Tooley. Perhaps there is an irreducible causal connection between the two physical states. So what he's basically saying, there's one physical state that's producing, let's say, the neuronal stuff that then causes the lactic acid and muscle contraction, right? So those on the lower level are causally efficacious. That is P sub 1 causing P sub 2 is fine. And separate irreducible causal connection between the phenomenal state and the physical state. So the physical state is causing my phenomenal state of, wow, I'm thirsty, reach down and grab the. So I'm translating. I know this is a lot of analytic philosophy. It's complicated, but I'm trying to give you a translation of this. This sort of causal overdetermination of events, what is he saying? That I have my physical stuff going on, physical state P sub 1 causing another physical P sub 2 state. Right, that's okay. The neuronal stuff is causing my lactic acid to contract, and to go so that my muscles contract. That's fine. But to have, and then that can cause my phenomenal or mental state. That's fine. But to have my phenomenal or mental state cause another physical state of reaching down and grab, he's saying that's a sort of causal overdetermination of events that is often regarded with suspicion. But it's hard to demonstrate conclusively that there is something wrong with it. Isn't that interesting? The nature of causation is sufficiently ill understood that overdetermination cannot be ruled out. So again, this is just what he's saying. This is David Chalmers, is that, look, we have these principles we try to abide by, like Occam's razor and avoiding causal overdetermination. But these are just principles. They're not necessarily veridical or a priori, true as principles. So the idea is, just because we don't like it doesn't mean it's true. That's basically what he's saying right there. Okay. Shall we move on? You guys aren't getting bored. I know. See, do you see how difficult philosophy of mind is? It requires quite a bit. It requires logic, an understanding of science, analytic philosophy, and various other things. So I'm trying to break it down as simple as possible. So I hope, let me just see if you have. Okay. So we've already talked about mental events versus phenomenal events. We've basically covered in that whole discussion epiphenomenalism, causal closure, what are mental events versus phenomenal, and then also higher level versus lower level properties. So higher level properties refer to mental states, and lower level properties refer to brain states, body states, stuff like that. And we talked about downward causation. So we are finished with that slide. Let's move to the next slide. Consider generally, these are two general considerations for philosophy of mind then. And we've already touched some of them. What is mind? By the way, you want to hear a funny joke? Just to lighten things up. So it was an old Simpsons, like when Simpsons just first came out. It doesn't even look, as far as the cartoons, look like what you would watch. And Homer's tucking Bart in to bed. And Bart's getting pondering some deep philosophical questions. And Homer's getting annoyed. So Bart says, Dad, what's mind? Same question we're asked. What's mind? Oh, Bart, no matter. Well, Dad, what's matter? Never mind. Here you get a clear illustration in a humorous way in The Simpsons of substance dualism. What's mind? No matter. What is matter then? It's never mind. Okay, so that is my joke for today's podcast. And the other thing that we're going to consider is, well, then how does mind relate, or how is it connected with matter or the brain? This is what sets up the mind-body problem. And if I can go to who created the mind-body problem? Your man, René Descartes, is the one who created the mind-body problem. Again, asking the question to René Descartes, what is the mind? It's a res cogitans. It's a thinking thing. It's simple. It's not composed of parts. It's immaterial. It's soul, and it's you. It's your identity. So you're not to be associated as the you or the soul with anything connected to your body. Well, what is the body or matter? It's the res extensa. So I'm just quoting the Latin. Res being thing, extensa, the thing extended. So up until very recently, this was a working definition for what matter is, the thing extended through space and time. So all physical things have extension. But isn't it interesting? Mind doesn't seem to have this property. Where is mind? Where is the thought of triangle located? There might be certain regions. It's like asking the question, where is 65 miles per hour located? It's like, well, you might have certain necessary conditions for the possibility and occurrence of 65 miles per hour, but your carburetor or your piston is not 65 miles per hour. You're not to identify that with this. But once you have basically two different substances, i.e. matter and mind, defined in a dialectical opposition, the principle of like knows like is dissolved. So, for example, when it comes to causality, or even more specific, motion, let's see if the way that this moves is by contact. Okay, so this object has to come into contact. If not, if you say that this object moves this object without contact, with distance, well, we all know what that is. It's occultism, right? If I start moving objects with the power of my Jedi mind tricks, you know that Father Deacon Ananias is in trouble. He's dabbling in the dark arts, and he's not doing science. So this idea is, well, the reason why things can give force and motion to another is there has to be a principle of likeness between the two objects. In this case, they're both physical, in which the motion can be passed from one object to the next. But now you start thinking about mind and body. If the two are nothing like each other, then how is it that mind is supposed to causally interact? And that's just one of the mind-body problems, and cause your physical body to move. It'd be sort of like you see in the movies in Hollywood, the ghost, right? They try to reach for something, and it just goes through. Because the idea is a ghost is made up of some type of ethereal or immaterial substance that is nothing like material physical substances, and therefore they just walk through walls and they can't actually grasp or do anything. So I like to use that. But the problem, so that's one of the causal problems with the mind-body problems. But it's more serious than that, because, and this comes from John Searle, is that, look, if we start listing what do we mean by mental, and we start listing all the properties, well, mental is subjective. What does that mean? What exists in the subject? So the taste of coffee does not exist outside of me. It's not like, oh, I fell down on some taste and I bumped my head. It doesn't make any sense. Where does taste exist? It exists within the subject, and therefore it's subjective. It's qualitative. Well, how good did it taste? Well, it tasted, and then you give a kind of a qualitative. Mental is also intentional, whether that's the propositional states as beliefs or desires. They're about things beyond itself. Mental states don't seem to be spatially located anywhere in the body or the brain. You can't strictly identify and be like, there it is, I got the thought of triangle. I've isolated it right there. You might have certain regions activated in order to have these thoughts, but that's not the same. So it seems that mental thoughts are not located in space. They're not extended through space. And they don't seem to, as we traditionally would define mental states, that they can't really be explained by physical processes. And again, this all comes from Descartes. They seem to be something entirely other. So we have the other problem too, is that, well, then there are also, and this is something that comes up in philosophy of mind called the causal closure principle. If the physical world is causally closed because everything in theory can be accounted for physically by other physical events. So physical event, piece of two of acting causally on the physical. Well, let's just define what we mean by physical, some of the attributes. Physical is not subjective, it's objective. And when we get to the conversation about subjective and objective, we also use terms. Subjective tends to be first-person perspective. The way I see something, or the way something appears, or the qualitative, the what it's like, is inaccessible. You might analogize and be like, it's probably something like I experience. But we know that that doesn't really work, because we can all eat the same particular food. Maybe somebody doesn't like pickles, and another person does. And they experience that qualitatively different. Is that because the pickle chain magically changes chemical composition on each person every time they try to eat a pickle or fruit or whatever object or food that you don't particularly like? contrast that to somebody that's like, I really enjoy, I really enjoy milk. I hate, can't stand the taste of it. That's because there's a what it's like experience that's first described in terms of first person. It's not publicly accessible the way objects in the material world are. So you might go out and say, look, there's a sun outside. Now, is that just my perception? Well, then you get a third person confirmation. A third person point of view is this idea of plurality that confirm, no, there's actually an object out there and I perceive it the same way. So physical things, and we use that description, they're objective third person point of view phenomena. Observer independent phenomenon, whereas the mental is observer dependent. But physical seems to be quantitative, not qualitative. It's also non-intentional, like I pointed out earlier. Desks and trees and chairs, they're not about anything beyond itself. They don't have a direction at a state of affairs. They're not directing themselves to entities or state of affairs beyond itself. But physical things are spatially located, unlike mental phenomena, spatially extended. They're also, guess what? All physical things within contemporary science is considered to be causally explainable by microphysics. And physical things, of course, causally act on other physical things. And as I said, that's within the concept that the physical domain is actually causally closed, so things can't, beyond the physical system, within this kind of paradigm, and thinking can't act from outside in, because then you have causal overdetermination. So look at the list that we have up here. We have a list of opposites. There's no principle of likeness, the way that we define mental and physical. So what John Searle proposes is what he calls a simple solution in his rediscovery of mind. Here is, let's just do away with this conceptual categories that underline materialism. What's really amazing, even though John Searle is a biological naturalist, and that's what his proposal is, let's adopt biological naturalism, he's a strong critic of materialism. And his argument is that oftentimes when people reject a paradigm, a school of thought, they end up embracing some of the same stuff that they're rejecting within their rejection, in their conceptual program. For example, I always like to use this example. Protestantism, in rejecting Roman Catholicism, embraces the same problems, conceptual, philosophical, and theological problems that the Latins have. So they're incapable, therefore, of divorcing themselves from this kind of scholasticism. Well, likewise, materialism, in attempting to reject substance dualism, it doesn't do away with everything in substance dualism. It rejects substance dualism and then carries with it the philosophical baggage of conceptual dualism. What's conceptual dualism? This is conceptual dualism. That you conceive of mental and physical having these properties, these opposing properties. These opposing properties is what's causing the problem. So what John Searle is arguing is that the same problem that the substance dualists have, substances, is the same problem that materialists have in rejecting substance dualism, because, oh yeah, they get rid of the substance dualism. There's not two substances opposing each other and unable to integrate. And you come up with ways of trying to get out of it. But as you see in philosophy of mind, the substance, dualists, and materialists are forever at war, going back and forth, and nobody's ever solving the mind-body problem. And John Searle's saying that's because doofuses still have a dualism of dialectical opposition within your philosophical projects that's causing the problem. And he believes that biological naturalism, you can be committed to a sort of naturalism that escapes the problems of materialism and substance dualism while still being a naturalist. So, okay, so I've already gone over what conceptual dualism is, presupposing that mental and physical, naively construed, are mutually exclusive. For example, traditional features of the mental and physical that are supposed to render them mutually exclusive. Okay. What is consciousness? Let me just check in on you guys here. See how you guys doing. All good so far? Any questions thus far? Looks like you guys are having some good conversations here. Okay, let's return back to our lecture. Again, philosophy of mind. And that's fun, you know, it's a what it's like experience. Now, only human beings have consciousness. Animals have consciousness as well, because they have a what it's like experience. So that's why I said don't get it confused with self-conscious. Being aware of oneself is different than simple awareness and what it's like experiencing. For example, to have a nice cold glass of water, you drink that, there's something it's like to experience that. But to pour cold water on you, there's an experience of what it's like to have that done. Likewise with your cat or dog or some animal, when they're drinking or cold water, there's a what it's like experience. Whereas if you poured cold water on a plant, although plants might respond positively or negatively to certain stimuli, they don't have a what it's like experience. Neither do rocks. I mean, obviously that, but sometimes people are like, what, the plants? It's like, no, they can respond to stuff in positive or negative ways, but they don't have consciousness. They don't have a what it's like experience. Within consciousness, it's considered to be a psychological property, not a property, brain states or physical states. Construed a psychological property. Now, there's two types of psychological properties: psychological consciousness and phenomenal consciousness. What is that, Father Deacon? Phenomenal consciousness is what I was talking about. That's the qualitative awareness, i.e., the what it's like of experience, which is why I referred to the word qualia. That's exactly. We use the word qualia to refer to phenomenal consciousness. But psychological consciousness, to either introspection or reportability. So I could report, I'm observing blah, 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 X, Y, Z. UK or Ireland. If you're in other English-speaking countries, it might be X, Y, Z. But you get the reportability of information. So when I'm thinking about certain information that I want to retrieve and access, that would be psychological consciousness. So we already talked a little bit about epiphenomenalism. Correct? But here I've got a slide. So what we physical states, two different states. Physical states have two effects. So I should have just popped up this slide when I was trying to explain, make it much easier. But now that I've explained it, that'll make this explanation with the slide much easier. They have two effects, physical states. For example, I sit on a pin, a sharp pin. Well, look at, have two effects. They cause another physical effect. So remember I said P that's sitting on the pin causes P sub 2, another physical state. That's a brain event. They also have a dual causation, because sitting on the pen not only causes a certain brain neuronal state, it also causes a mental state of feeling pain. Now, for example, you might have a visual effect of sitting on the, or the experience pain or something like that. Now, these epiphenomenal affect conscious life, but they play no causal role in our physical state. So feeling pain, and you'll see here that the brain state, so sitting on the physical state P sub 1 causes brain state P sub 2. Brain state P sub 2 causes mental state sub 2, because this will be mental state sub 1, of desiring to leap forward. Owie! Right? But your brain state actually causes you to leap forward. It is not the feeling of pain. It is not your desire to leap forward that's the lower bases that's causing you to leap forward. Why? Because all of this can be explained by antecedent physical states, P sub 1, P sub 2. So there's no room for mental states being causally efficacious. They're floating on top like the froth on a wave. They do nothing, but they're caused by the base. So mental states are like sounds that a car produces while running, or smoke that comes out of a smokestack of a moving train. But they play no causal downward role, no causal downward causation. Okay. Okay, here, let's go. Philosophy. So B properties are said to supervene on A properties if in no possible two situations. So you have two different situations. If in no two possible situations are identical with respect to their A properties while differing in their B properties. So A level or low level properties and B are high level properties in this scenario. For instance, biological properties are said to supervene on physical properties insofar as any two possible situations that are physically identical are biologically identical. What does that mean? There are no, i.e. B changes, mental changes, without corresponding A-level changes. But I want to come to this next slide to basically explain what it's going to give a better. So supervenience. B properties supervene on A properties. Remember what I said? If no two possible situations. So I've got possible situation 1 and possible situation represented here. If in no two possible situations are identical with respect to the A properties while differing to their B properties, is what supervenience. So you're given a definition of supervenience in terms of a negative formula. That suppose, and this again, it's getting out of the problems of epiphenomenalism by saying we don't even have to think about causal relations. Right? We're going to think about relations of dependence that doesn't have to be either causal or logical dependence. And so philosophy of mind kind of started moving into all these theories of supervenience. So what you're never going to find is with person 1, that is a possible situation 1 and possible situation 2 with another person, where You have person one having a mental state, and that mental state is thinking Denver is the capital of Colorado. You look at their brain states, the A-level properties, the neurophysiological states, X, Y, and Z. It's like, okay, these things are firing off in the brain. And then you look at the other person, and you see they're having a different B-level property mental state. And that mental state is thinking Paris is beautiful in spring. And then you look at their the neurophysiology. They're the same. They're the same as person one and person two, but yet they have two different. One's thinking Denver is the capital of Colorado, and one is thinking Paris is in the spring. But they have the same brain states. Supervenience says that'll never happen. In other words, you're never going to get a difference in two different situations, person one, person two, where you have changes in B level, i.e. one person's thinking Denver is the capital of Colorado and the other one's thinking Paris is beautiful in spring, without some type of change going on in the brain. It's impossible. Now, Searle only believes there's two types of supervenience. He actually identifies one as causal supervenience and then another is constitutive. So again, although theorists try to get out of the causal problem by introducing supervenience, it can be argued that in fact there is causal relations but there's not correspondence, right? And the reason why, see if I can find. So here is an illustration. Person one's thinking Denver is the capital of Colorado, and you see brain states X, Y, and Z. Supervenience says this is never going to happen. Where then person two is having a different A-level thought. Paris is beautiful. Sorry, a B-level property mental state. Paris is beautiful in the spring, and then having the same mental. And you might think, well, that's because if you're having the mental states X, Y, and Z, the brain states X, Y, and Z, then they both should have Denver as the capital of Colorado and person two, Denver is the capital of Colorado, because all brain states cause mental states. But remember, supervenience is attempting to get out of that causal situation. For example, what would illustrate this, with supervenience, this could happen. Okay, this is why I'm going to show that it's not strictly causal, because if it was simply the brain regions causing that, then you'd have identical. But here, mental states, which is types or potential states about Denver. So with person one, you have mental state, let's say token A, that Denver is the capital of Colorado. And what you find is that region number 9 within the brain is activated. Okay. And let's just call that token X of person one. That is the A-level property occurring right here. But look at person two. Now they do have the same mental state, correct? And the mental state is Denver is the capital of Colorado. So they have a B-level property mental state that's the same as person one. But look what's going on at the A-level property, the brain state. So we're using this by token Y, brain state type within region 39. Let's say ABC is activating the same mental state, the higher level phenomenon, that Denver is the capital of Colorado. So I use that to contrast and show that supervenience is not simply a causal relationship of dependence of mental thoughts or dependent on causally the lower level neuronal brain states, such XYZ, that the brain state will always cause the same mental state. Okay, so if you have XYZ in person 1 and person 2, then you'll never get different mental states. However, I can have different mental states. Sorry, the same mental states, same belief that Denver is the capital of Colorado, while different regions, it's dependent on different regions of the brain. So that's what I wanted to show there. Okay, let me just go over real quick. We'll stop. Oops. So here's different types of supervenience that, again, I don't want to go too far into detail. We've almost been going for 2 hours now. But so I just want to go over just briefly what the terms are. The types of supervenience: you could have local supervenience situations that are involving individuals. You can also have global supervenience. So we can talk about those relations between A and B properties in terms of the entire world rather than just particular individuals. And then you also have identified. Now, again, I'm just identifying some, like Jaguan Kim has, like, I don't know, like 70 different types of supervenience he identifies. But logical supervenience would be B properties supervene logically on A properties if in no two logically possible situations that are identical with respect to their A properties, but distinct to their B properties. So it's the same definition, but now we're just saying we're introducing the notion of logically possible situations, as opposed to, because you have the logical domain of possible worlds in which I could think of two situations, in which case blah blah blah. Then you have empirical natural situations where you have something more like natural supervenience, where B properties supervene naturally on A properties if in no two empirical or natural possible situations are identical with respect to A properties but distinct to their B properties. Okay. Let's give a visual slide here of the whole problem with, and say that muscle contraction, then in an upward causation causes me to wince. Oh! Also, the neuronal state causes my mental state pain. Okay, one of the things that we came to was a causal overdetermination. But supervenience can give an explanation of this, that, look, pain supervenes on, according to supervenience, the causation model, it's first the neural state to cause, on one side, a certain neurophysiological event, the muscle contraction, on which wincing is said to supervene, to constitute the supervenience base of pain, which causes, on a mental level, wincing. And then what you have here is questions of mental causation. Can we have downward causation? So when it comes to causation and various theories, specifically dualism, property dualism, stuff like that, you can get this nice slide here. You have interactualist dualism, where the pain causes the mental state. So this would be something like you might get with substance dualism. Your body causes you to have a mental state, but then your mental state can cause your physical state of wincing. But notice the physical state's not causing. Of sitting on the pin is not causing, or the neuronal state's not causing the wincing. It's the mental is caused by. That's called interactionist dualism. Here is an illustration visually of what epiphenomenalism is. Remember, epiphenomenalism is going to deny any causal efficacy of the higher mental phenomenon. So sitting on the pen and the neuronal activity produces the mental state 1 sub 1 of pain. And physical P sub 1, the neuronal state, causes the contractions, physical contractions, P sub 2. The P sub 2 causes the wincing. Okay, but mental state sub 1 and mental state 2 are not doing anything, the epiphenomenal. Then you have physiopsychic parallelism, where you have this kind of idea that, well, look, it's just the physical states cause other physical states, and mental states cause, so like knows like. Here's one way to get out of it. Like knows like, mental cause other mental states. They don't do that because mental states aren't anything like physical states. So physical states cause other physical states, and mental states cause other mental states. But never the two shall remain, but they are running parallel to each other. So it gives sort of the illusion that your mental state is in fact causing you to reach down or do some physical things like that. But that's just because they're running parallel. And then you have kind of a non-reductive account here that physical state sub 1 causes physical state sub 2. And you can have, in this scenario, downward causation. But here is the problem. That is the causal overdetermination slide. My neuronal state N, which pain supervenes on, neuronal state N causes pain, so contraction. However, too many causes, the muscle contraction is causally overdetermined. That's why I say, see Occam's razor. But you've already seen it. Okay. Now, just going back real quick, stuff that the universe is made of, that's physical matter. And physical matter might be defined as those entities or properties or laws that physics to posit or talk about. For example, one move from the idea that, let's say, I'm a materialist, no, I'm a physicalist, is that matter was traditionally defined as res extensa, that which has extension through space. Well, obviously, we are now in contemporary physics talking about stuff that really does not seem to fit that definition. Do neutrinos and quarks, does energy, does it extend through space? It poses certain problems. But somebody says, well, look, I still want to have a naturalistic ontological attitude about and be materialist, but it's strange because it seems that matter through the course of and history of philosophy is always changing. Platonic, it's like it doesn't even have a real substance or reality. It's shadow-like. And for Aristotle, matter is defined as the causes and virtue of the form and essence giving it being from within. And so you get a different definition of matter, what the form is made out of, that you don't find in Plato. So matter's changing there. And then as you go through, you get different definitions of matter and concepts, that it's extension, res extensa with Descartes. And through the whole process and history of science, philosophy, and physics, it just constantly changes. Now matter doesn't occupy any space. It's, talk about quantum mechanics and stuff like that. So some people thought, well, look, let's just say we're physicalists, and physical matter simply is whatever science has to posit, energy, whatever, that would still be considered within the physical domain, even though it doesn't traditionally fit a definition of matter, because nobody has a traditional concept of matter. It's all over the place. We talked about substance dualism. Substance dualism, in contrast to materialism, says, well, there's actually two fundamental distinct types of stuff in the universe, namely material substances and immaterial substances. Material substances like mind, souls, angels, gods. One thing that I haven't talked about that we could talk about in another stream and lecture is hylomorphism, which is this kind of Aristotelian idea, a highly matter morphe form, in which all physical things or substances are made up not of substances, but are made up of the composites of matter and immaterial form. So matter and form are not substance in themselves, they're what make up a substance. That's hylomorphism. Now there's also, we didn't get to go into behaviorism. And that's going to be related to the functionalism. So maybe at this point, pause and I'll just talk a little bit real briefly about behaviorism, methodological behaviorism, logical behaviorism, and stuff like that. And then in later lectures, we can go further into that. So behaviorism in its crudest form basically says the mind is just the behavior of the body. There's nothing over and above the behavior of the body that is constitutive of the mental. Behaviorism comes in basically in philosophy in two varieties: methodological behaviorism and logical behaviorism. Methodological behaviorism is really just stimulus response psychology. Now, behaviorism really had become an embarrassment by the 1960s. And it was gradually replaced among the materialist-minded philosophers, at least, by the doctrine called physicalism, which I'd identified in the beginning of this stream and lecture as identity theory. But just to give you an idea of behaviorism, what is it to have the belief that it's raining? It's to have either an outward action of when I'm outside in the rain, I carry an umbrella, or a disposition to that. And so there's the age-old joke that two behaviorists, husband and wife, professors, consummate their marriage. And because according to behaviorism, everything's internal reportability. There's no internal life. What is a mental thought? It's simply the outward. It's either a disposition to outward behavior or the outward behavior itself. So that's why I said, what is it to have the belief? You're not going to find a belief that it's raining internally. It's simply, if I'm given a certain stimulus that it's raining, what does it mean to have a belief? It means when I'm outside and it's raining, I have an umbrella, or at least a disposition to hold an umbrella. So the married, two married behavioralists consummate their marriage, and the one says, "It was good for you." Now, how was it for me? Is the typical joke that we make. Yeah, by the 1960s, behaviorism became really an embarrassment and was abandoned for identity theory. And within the 20th century, the philosophy of mind became one of the most central really areas in philosophy in the English-speaking world, and so it remains. And questions such as the relationship between mind and brain, again, the nature of consciousness, how we perceive the world, they've all come to seen as crucial in understanding the world itself. So some of the theories that I outlined, but these days, the predominant position in philosophy of mind aims at equating mental phenomena with the operations of the brain. So it's typically to explain it all in terms of scientific terminology within the domain of cognitive science. So cognitive science has really blossomed and boomed, and it carries with it the implicit assumption that cognition occurs in computers too, as well as in humans and brains, and can be studied as well. Because obviously when I talked about like humans, and it can be studied equally well in each of these forms: computers, humans, animals. But before the mid-20th century, for a long time, the dominant philosophical view of mind really was put forward by René Descartes. So we talked a bit about René Descartes and Cartesian dualism, substance dualism. And although the mind is considered immaterial, the mind according to Descartes, causes actions of the body through the brain, and perceptions are fed to the mind from the body. So that's why I had more of this interaction as dualism. Right here, Descartes thought this interaction between the mind and body actually took place in parts of the brain. And he tried to find, well, what part of the brain do we not know about that we could assign a role? The pineal gland. Wasn't that Joe Rogan's pineal gland is the seat of the homunculus consciousness? Didn't you know that? But he didn't clarify. That is, Descartes really didn't clarify, well, how a completely non-physical mind could have this like immaterial homunculi in the seat of the pineal gland and affect the physical brain. And in fact, what Gilbert Ryle, in critiquing Descartes and Descartes' myth, calls this the ghost in the machine. You can't have a mind causally affect a physical brain, vice versa, according to Cartesian dualism, because there's no likeness. There's like and there's no like between these two different substances. And then in the early 20th century, so I'm just kind of giving you a summation and conclusion of our lecture so far. You guys have been going for a long time. In the late 20th century, there were three strands that basically arose out of the developments in psychology and philosophy, which would come together to lead Cartesian dualism to be actually challenged. And then after being challenged, it's abandoned. And again, that's behaviorism. Then another project, scientific reductionism, and the Vienna Circle of verificationism. Let me just briefly describe each of these positions before I move on. Behaviorism. So remember in the beginning I gave some, but a real surface level, I'm just going to give you a little bit further detail. Behaviorists, like the psychologist B.F. Skinner, and his claims that mental events can be reduced to simply stimulus-response pairs. Stimulus, respond. And these descriptions of observable behavior are the only adequate, according to behaviorists, scientific way to describe mental phenomenon behavior. So for behaviorists, all talk about events, images, feeling, dreams, all is really either a reference to a behavioral disposition or it's simply meaningless, they said. So behaviorists claim that only descriptions of objectively observable behavior can be scientific. Redefine this. And introspection, they say, is therefore meaningless. It's a meaningless process, they thought, that can't yield any less a mind as a product and all human mental life that is worth counting as real, they'll say occurs as an objective observable form behavior. There's no internal life, as I said. So head scratching, that's objectively observable. And philosophers later, like Carl Hempel, Gilbert Ryle, they share the view that all genuine problems, like the behaviorist said, are simply scientific problems. So you remember I had mentioned something about verificationism. And I talked about this a little bit in my Quine lecture. And verificationism was a criterion of meaning for language. And it was formulated by the logical positivists of the Vienna Circle, who argued that any proposition that was not a logical truth or which could not be tested was literally meaningless. For example, a mother's claim that a cat will bite Jimmy if he doesn't stop teasing it is testable. But a theologian's claim, they said, that there's an infinite absolute is invisibly bestowing grace upon the world cannot be tested. Now, of course, the claim, this completely fell apart. This whole project, it was an embarrassment. This claim that the only meaningful or true statements are those that can be empirically verified, that statement turns out can't be empirically verified, and the whole project self-stultifies, and it's refuted. And we get a next movement, right? People just keep going on and on trying to get out of what's sometimes the obvious because they're committed. We'll give them that. Scientific reductionism. And that's a claim that explains, that gives explanations basically in terms of ordinary language or sciences, such as psychology, physiology, biology, chemistry. And all of those are reducible to explanations at a simpler level. Well, what's the simpler level? Ultimately, to explanations at the level of physics, they say. Some, but not all, mental terms can be what they say operationalized or reduced to testable and measurable descriptions. So, i.e. science. So we're reducing this. Only these ones will, according to them, the scientific reductionist rate as real mental events. So there will be no Cartesian or Platonic mind left over to be something different from the body, according to scientific reductionism. Okay, so, and this is going to have problems too. We talked about Gilbert Ryle, if you remember, Descartes' myth. We didn't talk about Ludwig Wittgenstein, who from 1889 1951 was the years of Wittgenstein. And he contributed, Wittgenstein was known for contributing an argument against private language. And he claimed that for a symbol or word to have actually meaning, there must be agreement conventionally among people about what that symbol is to mean. So in other words, Plato's idea of what a triangle means, that the interior mental image occurs in your mind. But by contrast, for Wittgenstein, that was simply a mental image, an inner mental image that occurs. He ends up talking about language in terms and reducing it in terms of symbols and images, and then we have a shared image. But contrast, according to Wittgenstein, triangle is a public word used to communicate as a social group. So children learn its correct or incorrect application by being corrected by your elders, I guess, in their use of the word. So according to Wittgenstein, apart from social use, he's going to say triangle doesn't even have any meaning. So I'm just developing what his argument of there is no private language. It's all public. So similarly, this is going to set up for this understanding that for the account of mind, it has no meaning apart from its effects. We also have somebody named J.J.C. Smart, and he added materialism to scientific reductionism and developing a point of view by claiming that mental states could literally be particular brain states. So example, some seed is firing off in my brain would actually be identical to the feeling of pain. So this is going back to identity theory. And that's what it's known as, the mind-brain identity theory. And for a long time, that actually dominated the philosophical discussions within philosophy of mind about mental events. But since then, identity theory and identity theorists have been superseded by discussions driven by computer metaphors. Surprise, surprise. And that, like I said, comes from functionalism, neurological reductive materialism. Then you have supervenience theories that add to this, naturalistic dualism, and whatnot. Okay, so how are we doing, guys? Do you want me to keep going? It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. I could stop here and just ask some questions. I mean, I have a lot more to say, but we could do a part 2. Yeah, maybe I could put the slides up. Let's see. Let me just do a few questions. Because some of this stuff I want to hold off on. I'm thinking about the discussions of functionalism. Then it's going to lead into black box functionalism, AI. And then the philosophical arguments against the possibility, a priori possibility of AI. Some of these are known as John Searle's Chinese room argument. I want to kind of hold off on that. again, we're just doing a general introduction. We've done a heavy, intensive load today. And think about it, this is just a general introduction course. So you can imagine how this stuff gets. So let me just see if you guys... I'm going to go back up in the live chat. Show you something. I'm going to show you what a PhD thesis looks like. I think that's just the draft. An alternative explanation of mind in nature. Lessons from Searle and Lonergan. By the way, you actually write about 10 times as much and then cut it all and refine it down to, let's see, 400, 300, 400 pages or something like that. Okay. So in there, it gets actually, I work through a lot of more in-depth, intense stuff. Let's see. Yeah, the whole theory. So prism, that's a good question about causation. That's a whole nother topic of like how to conceive causation. Actually, in my thesis, I think a lot of the mind-body problems, let me get into the identity theory. Maybe I can even finish this up tomorrow if you guys are interested. But I think part of the mind-body problem, again, I wrote about this, I think, in substance dualism. I took it a step further and basically said, this is a problem with the way in which we conceive of causation. So Prism, you are correct in your intuition that this requires a more thorough analysis and model of causation itself. And people are going to have different paradigms. You're going to have different notions of causation as well. Okay, let's see what else we got. Huh. Okay, let me see. I'm just going through some of your earlier questions and I'm going to work my way down. If you haven't seen two, and I've never seen anybody do this, but you can go look at my lecture on proving the immateriality of the intellect is a argument and refutation of materialism too. So there's many different ways that we can attack these philosophical paradigms as well. That is my own kind of unique argument there. I have many more arguments. We haven't even got into the irreducibility of consciousness arguments that I think work very well. Okay. I'm trying to see if you have any. For some reason, this is like freezing up on me. How's the stream so far? Has it frozen at all? You know, sometimes we get some bad internet reception here, and so don't forget to like and subscribe. I need more subscribers. You have all done very well. I'm up to about 1,200 now from 57 last month, so great. I need 2,000 before I can get super chats. But I also need your support, so I'll link after this video my Patreon, and if you can help me, support me. I love giving you guys stuff to work through and lectures. And if I get enough support, I can get new equipment and give you better and better lectures. Now, let's see. I can't even see the... Why is it not working? So I'm trying to go through... It's like just totally frozen on the chats. Like I'm trying to go through... I don't know if it's the internet. Is it choppy? Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to go down. I think if I press this button, it's going to go... Okay. I'm going to go from the bottom because I try to go up from the top and read down, and it's just... It's not working. Trying to see if you guys have any more questions. So I'm going. It looks like there's a lot of discussions and stuff like that. Yeah, what's good about philosophy of mind too? So somebody said there's logic in your senses. Clearly, it's not. Logic. I mean, a really easy way to refute this is that, but logic involves universals, and therefore they can't be in your senses because your senses are physical and particular. Also, added to that is if logic was in your senses change and logic would change. And if logic could change, there would be no meaning in anything. Everything would just be subjective and relative. And that means a person's argument that logic is in the senses could change and not have any, would therefore have no meaning whatsoever too. So that's a good. And if you'd like any discussions with, I know some of you reached out with some other YouTubers, contact them. I'm happy to have dialogue and discussions with other people too. I just don't think I can get this chat to where it's just frozen up. So how about we can finish this up? I'll try to do one. So where do we leave off? Okay, so I can go into what identity theories are. We already talked about this with supervenience. We haven't talked about Searle. We haven't talked about too far in depth as far as mental causation goes. And we haven't got into the irreducibility of consciousness. And we haven't got into, maybe I'll just hold off on the Aristotle. This is discussions about epistemological confusions with ontological categories, the objective versus subjective distinction. So how about we leave out there, and then on the next one, it doesn't have to be as long, and then we can have more questions too. So a blessed night. This was intense. You are the better for sitting through very difficult material. And not only you better, I'm sure you're smarter now. And again, I love it. This is my ministry. I love to teach you guys and answer any questions, train you in thinking through deep philosophical, theological, moral, and practical issues to help you. It's because I genuinely care for my fellow mankind and want to offer my services to you. I believe this is my calling. And so reach out to me, leave questions. I know some of you already have. I need to get to a lot of your questions and comments that you've left on the YouTube. And don't forget to support me. I'll put up my Patreon, like, subscribe, tell your mom and your dad and your friends, and help me spread wisdom and virtue through our decrepit and morally barren society and life that we live in today. You guys can become soldiers, and I hope that I can impart some of my wisdom to you. And I pray that you succeed in your goals, and that the Lord make his face shine upon you and keep you and bless you, even in the struggles, that you may grow stronger, that you may attain wisdom and virtue, and most importantly, love of God and love of neighbor. So I will end with a short prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever, into ages of ages. Amen. Lord, bless us, keep us. Let your light shine upon us and grant us wisdom to know what is truth, to know right from wrong, and to live with our brothers and sisters with love and love of God. Through the prayer of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy upon us and save us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And again, a blessed feast day of St. James to you all, and a happy names day for those of you on the new calendar of the blessed Saint and Apostle James, the brother of our Lord and Savior. Amen. Good evening, brothers and sisters, and hope to see you soon. I hope to have this another finishing up part 2 of this tomorrow. And I've got all from the previous day, all your suggestions of future streams and topics, great ideas. I concur with all of you that the topics you suggested are great, and we'll proceed with that. Thank you for your support. Please, your prayers for my wife and I, and my prayers go out to you. Blessed evening.